Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim, and today I just have the immense pleasure of chatting with North Texas Food Bank leadership, including Trisha Cunningham, President and CEO, and Chris Barrett, board member and managing director and partner at Boston Consulting Group. I am just so delighted to have you both here to talk about food. About how do we nourish people? How do we include people who are of lesser means in our economy through your good service, through your collaborations? Trisha, talk about the enormity of the problem that we are confronting in this country and in Texas, because 750,000 North Texans are food insecure. And in 2025, do I have this right? You provided 116 million physical meals in your 12-county area? 116 million? That's just amazing.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, if you look at needs today, many people think that COVID probably was the greatest needs in our history. And we did feed a lot of people, and you saw a lot of people in line during COVID. But now, shifting forward, the needs are still there. I think as we were coming out of COVID, no one really expected to have the economic impact that happened. And as people were trying to get on their feet, unemployment's down, but earning a livable wage when prices have gone up, have really made it hard for a lot of those in our communities to be able to have access to the food that they need. And so when something has to give and they still have to pay their rent and their utilities and all of that, they turn to food banks in our food banking network. You know, food banks are like a supply chain and logistics organization. We serve 12 counties in North Texas, and we have about 500 feeding partners that we serve through. And if you sort of zoom out a little bit from that, Texas now leads the nation in hunger. For the second year in a row, we have the most people here that are food insecure. And if you look at the Dallas-Fort Worth area by itself, we're third behind only LA and New York. And a lot of people don't realize that we have that level of hunger in Texas. And we are very sad that, a third of those are children. Half of those individuals make more than the threshold for some of the government programs. So that means that, they have to come to food pantries to be able to offset some of the needs that they have while they're trying to make ends meet.
And I'm so glad you cited LA and New York, because while Texas is distinctive in so many ways, hunger is not one of them. This is a problem that afflicts every single state and every single corner, right, Chris? I mean, this is a big problem. What's going on with the market that we have such a failure in feeding our own folks? What's going on?
Well, I don't want to try to give the proverbial answer to what causes, world hunger. But I think in Texas specifically, what we found is that hunger actually lives in every zip code here, and it affects. Trisha gave a lot of numbers, but you start to think about it. It's behind that are children's families. Older adults are particularly vulnerable,
right?
Particularly older adults living on disability who can't necessarily afford the groceries and the other necessities in their fixed incomes. And, while Dallas has historically been a more affordable major city than others, what we've seen here is that over the last 5 years, rent has gone up 30%, home prices have increased 40%. And, the Bureau of Labor Statistics says during that timeframe, groceries have increased about 25%. So, the truth is despite what is often portrayed and truthfully is a growing economy, if you measure it by GDP, a lot of that growth hasn't been distributed equally, and the costs for many people have outpaced their own income and their own means. So, we also know everything we're describing. This data is a couple of years old. And it changes regularly, and
it's not getting better, right? I mean, that's the thing is that all these trends. I mean, when we look at inflation, the one thing that we can't do without is food. We can even defer spending on our health sometimes, but how far can we defer spending on food? Not very. So let's inflect this. Let's talk a little bit about, I mean, the problem is so enormous that we're not going to be able to solve it. We're certainly not going to be able to solve it for the country, let alone Texas, let alone North Texas. But you are actually every day, and today is one of those days, you are actually addressing these issues. So, Trisha, give us the sort of the lay of the land, because this is a true point of collaboration. You actually have your role, but you have upstream partners, the people who are growing the food, supplying the food, your business partners. You have people who are transporting the food. And then you have your downstream partners, the people who are distributing the food to end users. So give us a sense of the entire workflow, if you could, in brief.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can't do this work without collaborating and working together across the community. We're a nonprofit hunger relief organization that primarily we distribute donated and purchased foods through a direct feeding program of nearly 500 food pantries and partners. In order to do that, we are like a supply chain and logistics organization. We have a fleet of semi trucks that get that food distributed across the 12 counties. We have other trucks that go. We have a nutrition team that actually goes into schools and helps with nutrition education. We have other things that are there to be able to try to help those individuals. But 90% of the food that we have goes through that partner network. So we're primarily, think of us as the scale organization. And then you can think about those food pantries and partners as those that really touch that neighbor directly. And we want that. That is a community-based trust that we want to make sure happens, because no one deserves to be hungry. And we want to make sure that we keep that neighbor at the heart of everything that we do. And by building those trust relationships in the community, that's the best way to be able to serve. So that way we understand why that person is hungry. Are they, in a job that isn't paying a livable wage? Do they have a health issue that needs access to nutritious food? And so why is that they need that? So then that partner can also try to help them beyond that issue of food insecurity. Additionally, we also help those neighbors by providing access to some government programs. So one of the things we have are case navigators that help us to be able to, for those that qualify, sign up for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. And we know that those are typically those that are the lowest of income. And last year we were able to provide access to about 21 million meals that were offset through the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program as well. And so that really helps it go further.
This really hits the nail on the head for me, right? There are some people who say business bad. There's some people who say government is bad, right? There's some people who say this is the problem or that is the problem. But what you've just described is this sort of collaboration amongst these different players. Chris, when you're looking at this from the point of view of sort of an architecture, a solution architecture, and that's what you do at BCG, right? You architect solutions, you architect strategies. When you're looking at this, and you're analyzing how things ought to function, are you seeing a really good collaboration, or are you seeing a good collaboration that could be better? Are you seeing friction in the system that could be addressed? How are you seeing this from your perch as both a business consultant and as a workflow analyst, as a strategist, and on the one hand, and then Trisha, who is actually managing the day-to-day, right? The people who are driving the trucks and the people who are moving goods and the partnerships and so on. How do you see this?
Well, I was surprised when I first started working with a food bank, exactly how complex that overall it's
about as complex as any business, right? As any business problem, this one nonprofit that is feeding serving 116 million meals, that's a really sophisticated operation, isn't it?
Yeah, and if you just think about food sourcing, because so much of it does come from the U.S., from the government, and as policies change and evolve, that affects how the food bank has to think about sourcing food over time, right? And as policies change and evolve that impact the neighbors, that can both change how the food bank serves them and the neighbors' needs. And then you have supply coming from very generous retail partners, but that isn't completely predictable the way that you would if you were operating a grocery store. You would say, I want this many pallets of product X, and you would expect to receive those. And the food bank doesn't have the ability to completely predict that. I mean, that we purchase where we need to fill the needs of the neighbors and the partners, but that's the least economically effective way of doing it. And so that is done to address gaps as opposed to be the primary source. So just on the supply side, it's actually supply and revenue side, it's very complex. And then you get into serving, 500 partners, which range from, extremely large scale operations, including college campuses, down to, churches in rural areas that may serve 3 families a few times a week, right? And the sophistication that they have in terms of data and resources, it's just not the same as you would find in a corporate environment, right? And I think the intent is positive in 99.9% of cases, right? When you talk about what are the opportunities to improve, that's where we really look at, how can we know more about the neighbors and what they need? How can we know more about our partners and how they're serving, so that the food bank can be as effective as possible, right? I mean, with the idea
business and end user intel gathering, right?
That's right. And because it's the nonprofit world and you have this variety of partners you're working with, it's just not the same level of sophistication and investment in it that you would find in a corporate environment, right? And so that's, I think, the opportunity that we see in the near term, and I say near term, I mean 5 years, I don't mean 20 years, is what can we do to bridge that gap, right? So that, we can have the right nutritious food available for every neighbor where she or he can find it at the right time, right? And that's, that would be the ultimate goal for the food bank, right? And doing that requires us to continue to invest in how we get that data, how we analyze it, how we process it, and then how we use that in operations to be effective.
The other thing, Trisha, that I think is so interesting is how many different types of competencies and organizations you have to have. In a sense, your supply side, the areas where you're supplying food, that functions a little bit like a trading floor in which you're seeing what's available. And then, as Chris said, you're filling gaps through purchases and so on. But that's a daily thing, right? Every day you're going out. It's almost like a call and a bid, that kind of a thing where you're trying to figure out what's available and then you're adjusting in real time. On the other hand, logistics now has to adjust to that. And you have drivers, they get in trucks, the trucks need to be fueled. It takes you have to think about the route and optimizing the route. There's a linear programming that goes on. You have financial management. You have, point of sale kind of things. How do you ensure the balance? Because it also seems that balancing the organization and ensuring that you have enough staff for the peaks and valleys, but not overstaffing for the peaks, because you might hit a valley and then you're overinvested. How do you actually do this? Talk a little bit about your financial team and your HR team and your infrastructure team that makes you function in a place where information will never be perfect and circumstances are always changing.
This is something that I actually am really excited to talk about, because I do think we run a little bit different than some other nonprofit organizations. We have increased our production. We've doubled it in the last 6 or 7 years. And
what does doubling mean?
That means the output of number of food that we were able to provide. So we built this facility that we're currently sitting in to serve our 12 counties. And it was based on the ability to try to serve 92 million meals. And that was something that we've only been here since August of 2018. At that time, whenever the strategy was put in place, they were providing a physical about 50 to 60 million meals. And there was still a large food gap in our area. And this facility was supposed to help us to be able to ramp our production to get to those 92 million meals. Well, I come from a technology background, and I realized that there was an opportunity for us at the food bank to utilize technology and data and resources to help try to make us more efficient. And I think the pandemic forced us to do that as well. We were running 3 shifts, 24 hours a day. And what we realized during that time is that we can actually more effectively manage over multiple shifts. We still have 2 shifts today, our equipment, the division of labor, when we receive product, when we pick the product, when we get it on the truck, how it gets out, and how we can most effectively use that. So we're actually running our warehouse today with a similar staff of what we were doing before, because we're more efficient as an organization overall.
With a pretty significant boost over the 90, what would you say, 92,000?
92 million. We're now currently serving physical meals of 116 million meals. So we're already over that. During COVID, we had to have 2 offsite warehouses just to be able to store food, because we had to kit it. It had to be, so which took extra space. We've learned inventory management skills. We have someone that is on our operations side that comes from a long history of corporate management of distribution centers. And so he understands all the corporate ways to do that. We have a quality team. Not many nonprofits have a quality team. They go down and they do checks on the floor to make sure our inventory is accurate and right, so that we're actually effectively doing that. We have a tool in our warehouse that helps our warehouse workers to ensure, and they have their names on a board down in the warehouse that says, this is your picking accuracy, this is the time it took for you. And so they can see their own stats, and so that they can do their own improvement with that. We have a training and development department that helps to ensure what are those gaps that we need in order to be able to help us to be more effective leaders and managers and have the skills that we need to perform our own jobs as well. And so we build that into our culture, a culture of learning and always trying to think about innovation and where we go next. We have a finance and technology team that really is trying to make sure what are the right resources and technology tools that are going to help us to be able to move forward. And we use business analytics to be able to use things from our data warehouse to be able to pull information and say, okay, where are we seeing anomalies? Oh, this pantry went way up this month. Why did it go up this month? What's going on there? And our community partner resource team, which I consider sort of like I call them our ad reps, because I used to, in my former role in technology, one of the things I used to do was manage agencies, but they're sort of our relationship managers for our partners in the area. And they try to understand, why would we be seeing this need go up? Or was there something that we need to do there? And so everything that we do, and we're using all these different services and tools and technology to try to equip our people to do the best job that they can. I will give you for example, our food sourcing team right now has sort of ahead of thing noticed that a lot of our distribution centers that we get donated food from, which is very important to us, they're realizing they're doing a better job of using AI tools to manage some of their inventory. Well, guess what? When they do a better job of managing their inventory, that means that there's less donated food that would be able to come to us. So we're having to figure out, with those efficiencies on the retail and the corporate side, how do we also get ahead of how we are trying to fill some of those gaps? So as you can tell, I'm very passionate about this area, because I think we are a business. I mean, we may be serving in a nonprofit arena, but we have to operate with all the efficiency and tools that a corporation would.
The way Trisha described it, I wouldn't want the listeners to think, wow, the food bank is spending so much money on all these fancy things. I think it's actually not the case. I think what Trisha and her leadership team have put in place is a really strong culture of just figuring out how to do things better at all times. So it's there's no complacency on things. It's, the business analytics team, it's a team. It's not like an army of people. It's a couple of people that have gotten really, really good at some of the technology tools, figuring out how can we give ourselves better insight into things. It's, the same people saying, not the same team, but it's people saying, hey, we're not doing as well enrolling people in SNAP as we believe that we can, and that support that the food bank provides. How can we rethink the way that we're doing this to get more people with the same resources? And so there's a constant, reinvention, not necessarily at the massive level, but at the small level of individual jobs of how can we be more effective. And I think that's really important for a nonprofit in terms of improving effectiveness, because the resources, more financial resources, the expectation is those go directly to the cause and not towards more staff and more people most of the time. So when the people can be more effective like that, it's hugely impactful.
It really does beg the question as to whether the nonprofit sector has a lot of lessons to teach the business sector. When an investment results, when a financial investment results in a financial return, you can basically spend an infinite amount of money as long as the money you spent is going to deliver a profit. So you can spend $100, $1,000, $1 million, $1 billion. If you're going to get more back than you're spending, you're fine. In the nonprofit world, the return is on social impact, on elders who actually have food, on children who can get educated because they have nourishment, on businesses that farmers who are supplying goods, and at certain times they have no buyers for those goods. How do you create a benefit for those farmers? It's a different type of return, and maybe that what you're pointing out, Chris, which is you can basically take a mindset where small teams can create enormous value. Maybe that's the lesson that we should all learn, that we can actually, as human beings, we can actually drive more value to the end users at less cost if we are a little bit more clever and take on some of the lessons that Trisha's team has to teach us every day. Are you learning anything, Chris, from your involvement as a BCG, like business workflows, strategist, specialist? Are you finding yourself being educated by this team?
Well, look, I do think there's something to what you said. I mean, working across industries, I have clients that are in industries with enormous margins, and I have clients that are and for-profit clients who are just in industries where structurally their margins are very thin. And I'll tell you, there is a difference there in terms of their operational effectiveness. The clients that I have that are in businesses where the margins are razor thin, they'll bend down to pick up every penny, right? That's what we say. And I think that they do operate a bit more like Trisha is describing the food bank. And I think there's learnings there. I think there are a lot of businesses that operate at very high margins, and they just don't end up paying attention to that stuff quite the same way.
To the details.
Yeah. I mean, or the details may be a little bit different. It may be in perfection as opposed to slight improvement. And I think that, if you think about businesses that are in very high margin structural environments, their ability to serve and deliver customers, if they were more financially restrained, would probably increase. There would probably be more discipline around it. Now, they're not really forced to have that discipline. But I think it is something that's interesting. There is a lot that people can improve without just saying we need to hire more, we need to spend more, we need more.
Trisha, I'd like you to talk a little bit about community building and movement building, because it seems like there's another part of this. It's not only supplying the immediate need, it's also trying to figure out how to reduce the need at the point where the need occurs. Talk a little bit about your educational programs, your gardening programs, and some of the other programs that tries to address the problem along those lines.
We absolutely, our new strategic plan is called Fulfilling Futures. And one of the things as part of that plan, in our last strategic plan, we started trying to test out what are some of the areas that we feel like are going to be really help to be able to lift people beyond food insecurity. Whenever we built this building in 2018, we did add on a garden, and we have community garden programs across the 12 counties that we serve. And, helping people to understand where food comes from and how they can grow their own product. That is absolutely one way that we can try to be able to do that. But there's a lot of other ways that we can do that as well, too. We try to understand what is that individual person's need. Every person is unique, but we tend to find them in a few areas. Number one, it's underemployment or education. So we work with a lot of colleges. We work with like Dallas College is our community college that's here locally. They're actually now a 4-year college, and they have food pantries at every one of their sites. Over the last 8 years, we've worked with them to try to make sure that they could get those food pantries at their sites. And one of the things that we found out is that the number of people that are at Dallas College, their average retention rate is 65%. But when a student accesses a basic needs service like the food pantry, that retention rate is 89%. So, that's crazy to think that just being able to provide holistically for the needs of that student helps them to stay in school, get the education they need to earn a livable wage that can help them break the cycle of poverty. We know health is another issue that can be a big challenge for many. If you have a health issue and you have to stop work or have reduced number of hours, then that's going to impact your income, and then you're going to need some extra help. I was in an Uber recently and talked to the person, and she was going through cancer treatment. And she said whenever she goes through cancer treatment, she's working, she has a job, but when she goes through cancer treatment, she gets her chemo, and then she has to be off work for a few days because of the chemo, and she doesn't get that benefit back. Whenever the shutdown occurred, we had people that were at daycare centers that they were taking care of some of the workers that were working that got were currently furloughed, and they had to be let go because they didn't have enough work for them. And so those are the kinds of things that you just don't think about. There's not a safety net for a lot of our population whenever it comes to their income. So if we can help them to get to where they can get beyond their health issue, they can have the nutritious food that they need and access that, and they're able to continue to go to work to be able to do that, then we can help break some of these cycles. And so that's part of what our Fulfilling Futures plan is helping us to be able to do. It's not only accessing food and working with our partners, but also understanding what those holistic supports are that our community needs, and trying to do that in a sustainable way and using data and technology to do that.
We can all learn a lot from all of you, from your entire team, because the constituents that you're talking about, this person who goes from her cancer treatment to work when she feels well enough to work, it's not a matter of her working harder in order to take care of her own needs. She literally can't. The elders that you're talking about, it's not a matter of figuring out how to get an elder back into the job market. There's just a limited amount. The children that you're talking about, you can't just say, well, go to work, child, and earn a living, right? These are the examples that you cite time and time again. This is not a matter of pulling yourself up from the bootstraps. This is a matter of how do you create a livable society in North Texas? And that's what you're doing. You're creating a society that everybody wants to live in.
Yeah, one thing I'd want to say about that as well, too, a lot of people have a perception of the person that is food insecure. The fact is, most people come in contact with people that are food insecure every day, and they may not realize that's what food insecurity work looks like. It could be the person that checks them out at the grocery store or waits their table, or that they go to church with, or maybe for a child they go to school with. And it's not that persona. A lot of people have the persona that these are people that are, homeless perhaps, or they're not working. And yes, we serve the homeless population, but it's a very small percent, less than 5% of those that we serve overall. The majority of those that we're serving are the working poor, seniors who can no longer work, or children. And that is who we're serving. But I've never met one of them that said, you know what, I want to be food secure and go to food pantries for the rest of my life to get food. They don't. They don't say that. And they are really trying to work towards that ability to be able to be food secure. And many of them, once they do get food insecure, actually come back and volunteer and try to help others as well.
And I'm one of them. So my story is when I was in college, my parents, who both worked, were in an extended time of unemployment. We didn't have any money. My college was funded by all sorts of debt, and I worked 20 to 40 hours a week. I worked as hard as I could. I studied as hard as I could. I couldn't do it. And the only reason why I could was because I was able to access a food pantry that was supplied by an organization like yours. So I'm very grateful. And, people who are in food insecure, they look like me and worked as hard as I could. I don't think I could have worked any harder in those days. So I am very grateful. Chris, you want to take us out in terms of what the future should be like for this organization and organizations like this in the United States and in North Texas?
Sure. I mean, look, I think the first thing is, there's a lot of things that, we talk about the challenges for the neighbors. We talk about the challenges of running a nonprofit. I think there's something that is an advantage that nonprofits have over most corporations, most for-profit businesses, which is they have a group of people that are immensely committed to a mission. And that provides a level of commitment and a level of care for the job that they do on a day-to-day basis that exceeds what you have in most other places. So I think one of the things is just leadership continuing to invest in their people going forward to promote that, to encourage that and invest in that. I think practically and from an operational perspective, there's so much that's happened in the world of technology that allows for more information and better decision making. And, I think that as nonprofits start to be able to have already invested in that, but start to increase the investment towards the more contemporary and current things, it's going to be about how do we use that? And given the incredible, priority of how you deploy your resources, of how do you use it correctly. So if we went through the North Texas Food Bank and asked everybody, what information would you like if you could have it? We'd get a list that was as long as War and Peace, right? And that can't be funded, that can't be developed. So I think what we really need to do is to say, how do we understand what's really going to move the needle in terms of serving the neighbors? And what we believe that comes down to is, first of all, understanding our neighbors better. And that comes through the partners, right? Because the partners are the ones that have most of the direct interaction with the neighbors. So then it becomes about how do we understand our partners as well as we possibly can? So how do we understand our partners? How do they understand their neighbors? And how can we use that together to be able to move food to the right place at the right time? One of the goals we put forward in our strategic plan was moving our goal setting from a county level to a zip code level, right? So, we talked about being able to meet the needs or meet a certain percentage of needs at a county level, but we also know that actually there's probably different demand levels within counties at a zip code level. And we want to be confident that we're actually meeting those needs at as granular a level as we can. And so using the data that we just talked about to understand that at the partner and the neighbor level, and then how do we move that through the operations, which are already very strong and agile and have shown the ability to adapt and be efficient. That's the real goal that we have in the next 5 years. And I think for any nonprofit thinking through what are the reasonable improvements that we can make in our operations and in serving our mission by improving the way that we gather and access data within our means, that can make a real difference. Just as it's made a big difference on the corporate side, it can make a real difference for nonprofits.
What a fabulous point to go out on. It's all about the people. It's about intelligent problem solving. Please thank your people, your donors, your partners, those members of the communities who actually support, but also are the end users of food banks. Trish Cunningham, President, CEO, and Chris Barrett, Board Member, Managing Director and Partner at Boston Consulting Group, thank you so much for sharing the work of the North Texas Food Bank. You have our undying support and admiration. Thank you so much for your insights. And just keep going, keep going. We can do this. We can actually address food insecurity in North Texas and the United States.